The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Hail Varsity Radio on a Saturday morning. Nice to have you alongside. Mark Cranack alongside. What do we got, Elijah? I'm blind.
Damon today. Damon Barr.
Damon, good morning to you, sir. Damon Barr is in the house, running the controls in Lincoln. I'm stationed in Omaha. I mean, we're spread out geographically here in Nebraska to cover the big day. And Chris will be in a little bit. We're spread out to cover today's the big day. It is the third schedule that may happen for Nebraska in 2020. I mean, we had the original schedule. COVID hit, came out with a modified 10-game schedule. Season was canceled, and it was not going to be revisited. Well, it's been revisited. Now we have yet another schedule. Nebraska is going to play 6 divisional games, so we know what those are. We just don't know when and in what order. 6 divisional games and then 2 crossovers against the East, as we might have football in 2020. We might. But I don't know. Are you skeptical about how restrictive the return to football measures are in the Big Ten? I kind of am. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to start out. It's a big day. 9 o'clock today is when the schedules are released. 9 a.m. It's going to be on Fox. I don't want to be skeptical. I want to be excited. It's going to be good. But let's break it down a little. Let's break it down. If the Big Ten states in this return to football, in their return to football protocols that the entire conference is adopting, if 7.5% of your team tests positive, you ain't playing ball. It's over. Team is shut down for what? Damon, check me on this. I've been trying to keep up with all of it. 7.5% of your team tests positive. No football for 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 7.5 people. So that's Nebraska carries a roster of about $150. So let's do some quick math. You're talking like if 11 guys.
We're doing math this morning?
Yeah, let's do math. Hi, Chris. Welcome back. If you're gonna have 11 or 12 guys, then that's going to be enough to suspend football operations for 3 weeks in an 8-game schedule. Well, I guess 9 total. In a 9-game schedule that has 0 bye weeks, 0 flexibility built in, on top of the fact that the testing that the Big Ten has secured is super sensitive. I mean, it is the thing I read about it, the antigen testing, is that it is actually going to detect a level of virus that till now you haven't been able to detect. So people that have a low level of the virus, this kind of testing, which they are going to do daily, which you are going to get back results immediately, basically. They're going to do this daily testing, and it's going to detect, it's sensitive, it's going to detect a level of virus that we have not seen before. So you put all that together. So these are people that it's sort of run-of-the-mill testing. They would go and they would come back as negative. Like, nope, you don't have it. Well, not with this test. You might have it. It covers you if you even have the virus at a pre-infection stage. So skeptically, I'm just wondering here, is this really set up for success?
It's set up for safety, Cranack. It is a high bar that Michael Jordan and Dr. J and, I don't know, Eric Strickland can reach if we're just talking about guys with ups. And it's a bar that programs, I think, like Nebraska, who've been pretty committed, can aspire to meet. I don't worry about Nebraska. I look at Michigan State, my Lord, their news yesterday with the positive tests and just the roadblock that is, and it was going to be a hell of a year anyway for Coach Mel Tucker. I mean, everyone's going to be wearing name tags through week 4. So it's stuff you had to agree on. It was concession driven. Obviously, you had the president's revote. You had a wonderful presentation, 3-part a week ago, with the schedule, with the TV, and with the health and safety side. And you got 6 votes to swing. So you've got no fans. You do have a schedule drop at 9 this morning. That's good.
It's some temporary excitement.
I don't disagree with you. They're like, man, it's like, as our old buddy Bill Dolman says, as we've referred to this saga as Revenge of the Nerds, you got the Alpha Betas versus the Lambdas, Gilbert and Lewis. You can figure out who's the jocks and who's the dorks. And the bar that's set to return to play is phenomenal. But I'll say this, all the things you outlined and detailed about how good these tests are. Yeah. I mean, look at Houston and Baylor. Like, we're talking 24 hours ahead of kickoff. Oops, due to contact tracing. All right. So at least you won't have that. You'll get your hopes crushed ahead of time.
That level of tease is being reduced by this testing?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, you'll have to cry it out probably a couple of times into your pillow at some point this season.
In the corner, holding your knees in the shower?
Right. I mean,
rocking
it's Jim Carrey with the plunger, all right? So it's going to be difficult, but I think it can be done. I don't know that you get 9 in. You're going to try.
No, hell no.
But you're going to get some.
No.
You're going to get some semblance, right?
You are.
And it's going to come down to who is committed and who's not, and it's going to be an opportunity for Ohio State to play for and try and win a title. It's going to be an opportunity for Penn State to maybe try and dethrone Ohio State, and it's an opportunity for Kranek for Nebraska and Frost. I mean, there's a lot of things that Bill Moose said this week that are super important, and Moose has been an incredible leader through this. So is Scott Frost. So is Ronnie Green. So is Teddy We Gonna Play Carter. But he thinks, we have a chance to be very, very good. All right?
Yeah.
And Bill Moose has prognosticated pretty accurately his time here. So I look at
whether
Nebraska,
or not we liked it.
Right. Bill Moose says we got a chance to be pretty good. Well, I'll take that and run with it. And whether Nebraska wins due to forfeit or whether Nebraska gets 7 games in or they get the full 9 because of their opponent, so be it. I'm anxious to see this schedule. How is it stacked out of the gate? Do you ease in? Do you hit the ground running? Or is it heavy out of the gate? And we talked to some folks from Ohio State this week. They're pretty sure that it's going to be Nebraska in Columbus at some point this year. That's how I want it.
In fact, some sites are reporting it's not. You can't take it to the bank yet. Week 1 potentially. Welcome back to football. Nebraska in Columbus, week 1. It's possible. We'll find out at 9.
Hey, fine with me, man. Hey, fine with me. Those are the two teams that wanted to play the most, the worst. Let them square off. See who's ready.
I'm good. I can wait. I don't know if I want to start the year like that. Look, now
they got to start the year too. All right.
Look, well, okay, that's very nice. You do recall.
No, I know.
How last year went down, right?
Speaking of crying in the shower, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, look, the competitor in me is saying, "Bring it on," but then the sort of realistic person in me is just assessing the program
because you don't want that. see, you can just like imagine worst case scenario. It's another 40-something to nothing spot, right?
You don't want that.
You don't want that, and then you don't want the narrative the week after. Well, Nebraska shut their mouth off. Nebraska sued the conference. Nebraska got, as our rewind guest Rob Zadiska says, a dirt road ass kicking. I mean, you don't want that just kind of floating out there as, oh, hey, welcome back to football, Nebraska. Ohio State just tuned you up. Hey,
No.
I mean that's your welcome back to football. But you know what? A lot can change from week 1 to week 9.
That's right. I mean, Justin Fields could catch COVID. Right? maybe there's a chance. There's a chance that could happen.
You're already throwing out the. Well, they can catch COVID too. Man, wow.
Just like start to hire people that are infected to just like go to the Ohio State dorm room.
The old Ferris Bueller's Day Off scene. Somebody shows up with balloons at your door. I hear it's your birthday.
I mean, look, hey, I'd be all about it if Nebraska could. I mean, imagine that, by the way. Imagine if it was Ohio State week 1. Imagine if Nebraska like pulls it off on the road.
That's right.
This place would come unglued. You would, and then the first time Nebraska has a home game, even though there's no fans allowed, I think the fans would probably just storm the gates.
they would climb over the fences. All of a sudden, it's not. Wow, that's awesome. So and so's got a big family. Like we're talking South End Zone big. Yeah. Who do we got on the horn?
We got Gary coming up.
All right, Gary. Thanks for listening this morning. Go ahead.
So these are my choices. I get to see. No football, or I get to see Nebraska get crushed by Ohio State, right?
Right.
Well,
you guys are just full of good news.
Hey, welcome to 2020, Gary. The good news is we've got football back.
And the good news is, the good news is this a bad news, good news kind of thing?
I got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is you might be leading off with Ohio State. The good news is you're leading off with Ohio State.
So this was done on a serious note. This was done. I was listening earlier. You were talking about whether or not we were set up to fail or succeed. So how if this test is so sensitive, how possible or impossible is it to get a false test one way or the other?
See, that's the whole thing with the testing, how it's being touted anyways, is its accuracy.
Yeah.
And its ability to detect a level of virus that you otherwise cannot detect. And so it's like a pre-infection level of the virus. So what I want to figure out is like the semantics of, hey, so say you do test positive for it, but it's pre-infection level. Does that count? Does that count as...
Is that a positivity rate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you think about numbers
unknown.
here... Sorry to cut you off here.
Right now, is that right?
One more time,
Sorry.
Gary.
I said that's the unknown part, right? We don't know how they're going to do that yet, or have they said if there is any kind of a positive test at all, you're going to sit?
We don't know the threshold. I don't know. I have no clue about the threshold.
Don't know yet, but I think I would lean that way if we had to guess. That's probably what it is. And then so if you think about Nebraska having a roster of 150 guys, that's basically what, 13? You'd have to round it off because 7.5% is the threshold. You'd have to go over that. But approximately 13 guys on the team at any given point and shut down for 20.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, it's a third of the season, but it's number of tests that are positive divided by total number of tests. So being the smart ass this morning, I think you just test a hell of a lot of people associated with the program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
just give me more answers on the test.
All right.
So like if Coach Frost definitely does not
See you,
have
Gary.
tested-
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
Mark.
Gary. So if if you're Nebraska then, and you know Scott Frost doesn't have it, you just test him 48 times.
Could.
To skew the numbers a little bit.
That is absolutely wrong, and we are not saying that is even remotely being considered. We are just joking.
Of course not. Yeah, that outside linebacker over there, I don't know. I think he's got it. Test him once. You know? It's one time sort of skewing the number. I don't know. And it's going to... You got to look into it more. I wouldn't say there's been a ton outside of the day of the release in the way of details that's been put out prominently anyways. But worth looking at because that's what you're talking about. You have this sensitive testing protocol. You have a roster of 150 guys. You're basically saying if 13 of them have it, you're out. And there's no wiggle room.
The thing that's good about this COVID test that's rapid, that is got a level here of, what's your positivity rate, what's your pre-infection rate. Okay,
it's a great test.
It's an amazing test, but I think
in terms of viral management and all that virus management, fantastic. I wish this thing was spread all over the country, but sorry.
I'll say this allows you to keep your room intact.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a situation where if one quarterback is positive, everyone else is wiped off, and it's me or Damon or you starting at quarterback. All right.
But we're gonna do a lot of handoff or a lot of wildcat.
Yes, we are. We're gonna call the Terminator back.
Like, Diedrich, you go in, wildcat.
Just take the snap and stay the hell away from the quarterback room. I don't think it's going to wipe out a room with this testing capability. It may take a player off the roster and goodbye a third of the year, but it doesn't mean that the rest of your room's knocked out, which is great from a contact tracing standpoint. I want to spend a couple more seconds on the schedule. We had a great sit down with Rob Zatechka, Dr. Rob, Husker legend and part of the pipeline. He'll break down this testing further for us, and we'll get his take on the offensive line. But you can be optimistic. You can be cheerful. I can also understand how you, as a fan, are emotionally spent and just drained because you're waiting another month. But at least you got the answer you want. And I think I'm going to focus and center here on the reflective part of what got us here, and that's just the work and the never say die attitude of Nebraska, their administration, and their head coach. And I think that needs, it's been highlighted and circled, I get it, but do you realize what just got pulled off?
Yeah,
you looked into a super elitist conference board with a bunch of chancellors and presidents that were so damn worried about being right and first, as well as health and safety. But if I'm gonna look at the scale, it's more about ego and trying to be the leader, which is followed, that jumped the gun on this thing, and this looked very bleak. I mean, I was holding. My candle was lit forever. It almost went out. It did go out last week, and then it flipped 180. And this was executed beautifully by the folks at Nebraska, at Ohio State, and then you had some help with Barry Alvarez, Sandy Barber, and Ohio State they found their voice with their medical people as kind of the big dog in the conference that helped flip this. And I want to give some credit, and it's not been handed out a lot, but you got Uncle Morty up at Northwestern, Shapiro, who said, yeah, let's listen, let's look at this. So you had some people change their mind. And you have a commissioner that still needs to stay off camera because he's just awful and worthless. But the point is it got shifted. You do have a chance, man, and that's all that matters.
Well, and dude, as Mike Riley would have said, what is it? Hip hip hooray! For good old fashioned.
Mike would have said, "Where am I?"
So 2 cheers, hip hip hooray, whatever you want to call it, for just plain old grassroots activism.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like that mattered in this case. That, like, the voice of the people would not be. Think about this. You had like a Glenn Snodgrass being interviewed on Fox News. Mm-hmm. Like, what?
Good old coach.
In what world would that have otherwise, right? Like, that's to escalate things to that level, to get that much attention. These parents that don't live anywhere near each other, that have maybe met each other at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in the past over a weekend. Parents living in Minnesota, some in Nebraska, some in Texas, a couple in New Jersey, parents in Florida. They rally together. They retain an attorney. The attorney's a good attorney, knows what he's doing. The attorney general gets involved and starts saying, now that we look at your nonprofit status, looks like you are not in compliance.
You are out of order, sir.
And then that happens in Ohio, and there's people demonstrating at the Big Ten offices in Chicago. Then the players are bringing forth a lawsuit. Like, come on. Like, that was an immense pressure campaign. Each one of those things by themselves, maybe not a huge deal. An eyebrow raiser, but there were a lot of them, right? I mean, parents united demanding certain things. Attorneys general demanding things. Player petitions from Ohio State. Player lawsuits from Nebraska. High-profile national interviews. I mean, an immense grassroots pressure campaign moved things. It changed stuff. That's amazing. That is an amazing situation just in the history of college athletics, period. I mean, what the hell did we just go through? Right? I mean, it has been absolutely incredible.
Boot camp.
How the whole thing has unfolded since early August.
You know what? And back to Ohio State, if and when Nebraska opens the year with them, brother, it's nothing to lose. You got house money. You got nothing to lose. You almost beat them once. They took it to you last year. They are loaded and hungry for a title run. It ain't going to be in your favor because they are the conference darling and hope. That's a big part of why you got back here from Ohio State's got a chance to go win a national championship. That argument didn't fall on deaf ears. So we'll see at 9 if it is Nebraska, Ohio State to kick things off. You can learn a lot from playing the best, and that's where you want to get back to being. So go at it.
Right. You want the program to be back to the point to where you don't bat an eye at that, right? We've sort of become conditioned over the last 10 years or so to be like, oh, God, look at that schedule. Mm-hmm. As opposed to looking at it as cool. Let's go. Right? Just because, I don't know, fear of the past, fear of experience in the past. You hope they get to that point where they can roll up to Columbus, be competitive, if nothing else.
Yeah, just be respectful. And I know the effort will be there. We'll step away and get caught up with Dr. Rob. Our chat with Dr. Rob was Tuesday of this week when momentum was all sorts in the right direction. All we were awaiting was the announcement officially, but we felt really good that it was going to happen. So Dr. Rob will take us through this testing, and we'll get some offensive line synopsis from him. Weekend edition of Hail Varsity, the big reveal coming up here at 9, and we're presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Now back with Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery, with Chris Schmidt and Mark Cranack.
Doc Talk, incredible podcast with this Husker standout, legend, and Hall of Famer. The pride of Lincoln East is Rob Zatechka. Dr. Rob joins us. Rob, a good day today. If you're a Nebraska fan, all we need is the ink to dry and send to be pressed on the computer. How are you?
I am well. I mean, that's what it sounds like, so I'm pretty optimistic here.
Yeah, that's the word. Now, Pete Thamel has jumped on Twitter, one of the national writers, and with Pete, he's the Yahoo dude, and says no official word yet about a Big Ten restart has trickled down to Big Ten coaches. Many programs have been planning the past few days for October 17th, pending the upcoming vote decision, but a lot of optimism, a lot of hope. Maybe later this evening around 7:30 or 8 potentially. That's where we can shoot for. And the old hot mic, only in Nebraska, Rob.
Well, and I mean, it's you know what? In this day and age, it's one of those things where, one, if I'm in the media, I'm never turning the microphone off to begin with. Mm-hmm. Number two, if you're behind a microphone, man, you better assume that puppy's on and it's recording. So that's just kind of the. Now, I don't say that as a criticism of President Carter, but it's just it is what it is, and kind of that news slipped out, and I think he was just kind of making small talk conversation. But I was going to say, I mean, it kind of jumped out there pretty quick, and sounds like it's the real deal.
It does, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on a lot of things, but I'd love your take on. Put your medical scrubs back on if you're not out of them yet, Dr. Rob, and give me a thought here. Just lay out in Schmidt barely past fourth grade terms just this rapid testing. I know the price point's money, and I know the testing has been fairly accurate, but just from your medical background, how it kind of came to be. I know Illinois had it for the students. It's been about a month. And just how this process works medically for it to emerge, because this has kind of been the hammer that helped the Big Ten at least get to this point for hopefully restarting.
Well, I think it is. And now this kind of goes back to when all of this first started. Sort of one of the key things in terms of dealing with any kind of infectious disease, pandemic, epidemic, on whatever level, is being able to test for it. And especially when you've got a disease like this where you do have those asymptomatic carriers. You've got some people who are truly not going to be affected by this. And in fact, it might actually be the majority of people not affected by this. Now, that doesn't mean people aren't going to be affected by it. And when you get down to kind of looking at some of these issues, we've talked about the myocarditis, whether that truly is or isn't going to have an impact on this is going to be hard to tell. But the main thing is that if you've got kind of this point of care testing, and what I mean by that is literally take a test, you've got results in an incredibly timely fashion that you can take a test, know those results within a matter of minutes. And I'm hearing anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes with these rapid testings that they have. The nice thing about it is that you can turn around and test a huge number of people in a very short amount of time and make a decision in terms of playing a football game, being able to take these guys and say, hey, okay, these 3 guys tested positive, the other 80 guys didn't. We're going to go ahead and play the football game. And so it gives you that ability to literally kind of pull that trigger on the spot on game day and feel like at least you've got a relatively safe margin of error here to move forward and play football games, knowing that you've got guys that probably are not positive. And so that's something we haven't had here. If you think about it in terms of all the other tests, you're looking at maybe 24 hours on the short end, I think, probably closer to 2 to 3 days on average in terms of a lot of the previous testing methods that they had out there. Well, that kind of you don't have that ability with those longer-term tests where it takes you 1, 2, 3 days to get those results back. And so that's why this is a game changer, not just for football, but in terms of probably ultimately managing the epidemic going forward.
Let's talk about management and the on-field. If we move forward, when we move forward for October 17th, pending this announcement we're expecting from the Big Ten, let's get into to Scott Frost in Nebraska and their new bro, Ohio State and Iowa, right? So, in Europe,
the yes voters,
right? The yes men. What's your reaction as a proud Husker and one of the best to play? What's your take on how Nebraska kind of pushed this thing forward? It's fourth and goal, right?
I'm happy that somebody was willing to stand up and basically say, hey, we think a wrong decision was made here. Now, Nebraska had to kind of crawl out on a little bit of a limb here, because when you look at the other two schools, when you look at Iowa, you look at Ohio State, okay, you know what? They got some ground to stand on. They got a leg to stand on here in terms of directing some criticism back at the conference, just by virtue of the fact of the on-field success that they've had. That gives you a little bit of sway. That gives you a little bit of pull and power in terms of being able to do that. Nebraska, they're kind of the new kid on the block. I know they've been in the conference for 10 years, but still like moving to a small town in Nebraska 20 years later, you're still the new kid. Mm-hmm. But Nebraska's still kind of the new kid, and they haven't had that on-field success, at least not in football, in terms of being that team to say, hey, here's what we think ought to be done. I mean, football-wise, Nebraska's still kind of sitting at the little kids' table a little bit. And so it was a bit of a ballsy move to be able to stand up and make that noise and kind of start pushing the buttons that got the ball rolling here.
Absolutely agree with you on that. And then once Nebraska kind of got through the door or played fullback for everybody, you could follow your fullback and your offensive line into the end zone. I mean, without Nebraska piping up, this doesn't move forward. Rob, we'll get that return to play vote. You had the presentation by the medical committee. You had the presentation with TV and scheduling. So assuming things move forward and it's a return to play, and that's what we're hoping for, do you believe we'll get all 14 teams, or are you in the camp where you believe some will opt out? I've had two different thoughts on that. I still think some teams will opt out. They'll say, okay, we're not going to stand in everyone's way, opposed to the 11-3 vote a month ago. Go ahead. But I think some teams will opt out. Or do you think the Big Ten will show a step forward unity-wise and all 14 teams will give it at least a shot?
I bet there's teams that opt out. When you look across the country, maybe not necessarily as much at Division I, but you look at there's a number of other conferences, and I think a lot of it had to do with resources. Even within the Big Ten, where you've got all of this revenue sharing, there's still some differences team to team in terms of what kind of revenue they've got, what kind of money those teams make. There's a big difference in terms of those resources between a Nebraska and Ohio State or Rutgers. I think political differences play in here as well, too. I think when you look at some of the university leaders and how those university leaders interact, the connections and relationships they have with the individual politicians, government within their individual states, again, there's a huge difference between a Nebraska and a Maryland and Iowa and a Rutgers in terms of how that university brass thinks from a political standpoint. And I think those factors are going to end up playing in here. And you're going to see some teams that opt out for, like I said, there's probably 2 or 3 big reasons that are all going to play into that.
What about revenue sharing here? Do you pay them? Do you short them? That's a bigger question, assuming we get a full season in. But put your commissioner hat on, take your scrubs off, and how would you handle that? Those that opt out.
Boy, that's a tough one to deal with. And I think a lot of it maybe comes down to, I think, the reasons that are going to get put forth by an individual school for opting out. I think if most of the schools that opt out because they say, hey, we don't have the resources to handle the testing, the medical care, the follow-up, things of that nature. If that's the issue, then I think you're going to see they're going to go ahead and do revenue sharing with everybody. I think if the main reasons teams opt out, it's one of these, hey, just from a political standpoint, from a decision-making, even if it's just a medical decision-making standpoint, we don't think it's the right thing to do, then I think you don't do revenue sharing. Now, again, this is kind of my opinion in terms of how to deal with this, but I'm almost one of those, if it's a case where a school feels like, hey, this just doesn't jive with our cultural or political mindset, well, then I don't think you get paid if you're not playing.
Rob
now,
Zantis.
I don't know how many people from a television revenue standpoint are turning in to watch Rutgers and Maryland play anyway. So how big a deal is that? People are going to watch Nebraska. People are going to watch Iowa. People are going to watch Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, et cetera. I don't know how many people really care about watching the Northwestern. I mean, what's the television share for a Northwestern Rutgers game? It's not very much. And so in terms of what those teams bring from a TV revenue value standpoint in the first place, I don't know if it matters all that much, in which case you could probably say, fine, go ahead, opt out. It wouldn't make much of a difference than if you did play from an overall revenue generation standpoint.
Rob, I need 5 more minutes. Can I keep you 5 minutes? Got to take a quick break. Is that good with you?
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Rob Zatechka, Husker Hall of Famer, part of that pipeline. And we are talking Nebraska return to play as we await official word from the Big Ten. And Rob Zatechka, Dr. Rob, back with us on the other side. It's Hail Varsity as we move forward. Teddy, we gonna play Carter, the hot mic that kicked off a joyous day, we hope.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Extended sit down with Husker Hall of Famer and All-American started on those championship teams with Nebraska, so many Big 8 titles and national title in '94. Rob Zatechka, Dr. Rob Zatechka with us. And check his podcast out at Doc Talk. Rob does a great job with Travis Justice. Rob, thanks for hanging out. You're very kind every time you come on. You are fantastic. I appreciate you. Couple of last thoughts. One, do you expect any Big Ten revenge on Nebraska by the league at some point, either scheduling, or is that just because of maybe some Big 12 memories we may have?
I don't think so. I mean, even when Nebraska left the Big 12, I didn't think the schedule was all that bad. I thought the on-field, I swear to God, on-field officiating took a turn for the worse.
A&M, brother. A&M.
Yeah, that last season, the on-field officiating, maybe it was just because the Big 12 officiating just took a nosedive. But, I really don't think so, because I think it'd be too obvious. Now, at the same time, too, I don't think anybody's – I know Nebraska was the first one that kind of – I'm not sure raising the red flag's the right way to put it, but even though Nebraska was kind of the first university that stood up and basically said, hey, this isn't right. Let's kind of revisit this. We think we can play, and we think we can do it safely, and we think there's a way to do this. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep pushing. Keep in mind, because you had parent groups from Iowa and Wisconsin and Ohio State that made a heck of a lot of noise here. You had players, you had coaches from other schools that made a heck of a lot of noise. Now, I know Ohio State and Ryan Day swing a pretty big stick in the conference. But, man, that was a little bit of a verbal bomb that Ryan Day dropped this past week. And so it's not like Nebraska's this lone ranger here that it was the lone voice in all of this. Now, I still have a little bit of alumni pride in the fact that Nebraska was kind of one of the first schools that really made the news and bore a lot of the national media criticism for the things that they said, but we're by far and away not the only one. I know the lawsuits kind of primarily came out of Nebraska, but again, I think in most people's common sense mind, I don't think those lawsuits had a whole lot of intent, purpose, or effect other than to force a spotlight to stay on this issue, to keep the media paying attention, to not let the conference on the whole relax. I think that was the ultimate purpose of these lawsuits, was to get to where we're at right now. It wasn't one of these, hey, we really seriously think the Big Ten Conference violated some number of their own bylaws and Freedom of Information Acts, et cetera. The whole intent was to get to this point where we're going to have an actual decision made and hopefully a little bit of transparency behind that decision, as opposed to, hey, we decided there's no football and there really wasn't a vote and we're not going to tell you anything other than that.
Rob Zatechka with us, Husker Standout, part of the Pipeline, his podcast, Doc Talk. Last thought, Dr. Rob, Nebraska, their offensive line. I remember talking to you when spring ball started. We were feeling all right about the potential with Greg Austin's guys in a 3-week ramp up in a crazy 2020. Do you give Nebraska an advantage, at least on the offensive line, moving forward for what could be, we hope, a full 8 or 9 game schedule? Where does Nebraska kind of fit in based on what you think of the line?
I don't know. That's a great question, and I hate giving you a vague answer like that. But there were so many unanswered questions due to not having that spring football. And I know they've been doing some types of walkthroughs and practice down in Lincoln. I don't know how much, and I don't know how much they've been able to actually try out that whole idea of moving Farniok to guard, having Ben Hart at tackle, kind of figuring out who that other guard spot's going to be. Is it going to be Hickson? Is it going to be Bo Wilson? Is it going to be one of the young guys like Ethan Piper? We were left with so many unanswered questions on that offensive line because of the loss of spring practice. It's going to be hard to say what they do. Now, my gut instinct, and a little of this goes back to what Greg Austin said, in that they've got all 5 returning starters coming back, essentially. You can just move forward with those 5 guys. And you've got a little bit of a comfort level there. Those guys were playing what I would say would be an okay level of football at the end of last season. I'm not going to call it great, but it was okay. I think with some different lineups, it could be better. Maybe they'll go ahead and just say, you know what, screw it. We're going to go with that revamped lineup going into the season, and we're just going to roll with it and see what happens. But I don't know. Until that first game rolls around, it's going to be hard. You're not going to know exactly what we're going to see.
Well, that's absolutely fair. You feel all right based on the starts for most of the guys. At least they've been in the action, so to speak, and you got a little bit of time for Ben Hart, although very limited last year. But time will tell. Let's just get to that first game. Dr. Rob Zatechka with us, Hail Varsity, and his podcast, Doc Talk. And, Rob, appreciate your time, man, and we'll do this again, and thanks for jumping on today.
Absolutely. Hey, you guys have a great rest of the evening.
You too.
The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it, weekend edition into Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Cranack. Damon Barr is with us. You can find us all on Twitter at Schmidt_radio. At Mark Skurs for Mark Cranack, and 2 R's at Damon Barr is where you find Damon. We say hi to managing editor from HailVarsity.com and magazine and author with John Cook, Dream Like a Champion, Brandon Vogel with us. Follow Brandon on Twitter at Brandon L. Vogel. Vogues, what a week. The good news is football is back. Do you look at it as bad news that you might kick off the year with Ohio State?
That's rarely good news, I guess, in a year like this, where maybe better week 1 than week 8, I guess. And you hope that you catch a team like that still working through some things. Now, you've got to be a little bit further advanced yourself to fully take advantage of that. But I guess if you're just choosing, it's probably the earlier you get Ohio State, it's probably the better because they're only going to round into shape, probably not fall out of shape.
Brandon Vogel is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. Nebraska's schedule and the Big Ten schedule set to come out in under an hour on Fox. It'll be the third iteration of the schedule, Brandon. Any insight? From what I understand, it's going to be 6 divisional games. Those are kind of locked in. And then you're going to get 2 crossovers from the 3 that were already announced with the 10-game schedule, which means Rutgers, Penn State, or Ohio State, plus the whatever game at the end of the year where it's just matching seeds. Any pros or cons to, say, Nebraska drawing Ohio State, Penn State versus Ohio State and Rutgers? What would you prefer?
Ohio State, Penn State, just from a kind of, from a curbside appeal standpoint. Those are obviously big games. We'll get pretty prominent placement on those Saturdays should they happen. I mean, the Rutgers one was interesting with the potential of Noah Vedral, of course, something we could talk about, in the halcyon days of when we thought a regular football season was going to happen. But I would be surprised. Like it's pretty hard to say no to an Ohio State-Nebraska game, assuming it all still works out with the rest of the schedule. And I think you probably do what you can to make sure it works out. Nebraska, we know where Nebraska has been over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's not where Ohio State has been by any means, but still 2 brand name programs. And really, Ohio State and Penn State, deserving favorites, both top 10 teams, in the preseason polls that came out. I think you want to see what Nebraska can do. This season, had it gone off on a regular schedule with a regular 12 games, was still going to be about, hey, what progress is Nebraska making kind of year to year, and getting a chance to test yourself against the top 2 teams in the conference. I think helps with that.
Vogues, how are you looking at 2020? A gift? Something extra? And I mean, 2020 has not been a gift, but I'm saying the fact that you get football after so many different roads you've had to take to get back to it, to revisit it, to get what you got last weekend. This sounds like I'm couching a bad record, but I think 2020's kind of always been about development and that next step. And to me, that next step looks a lot more like a grind-out Big Ten November win in 2018, Michigan State, than it does a situation where you're getting blown out of the water and you're doubting yourself. I mean, I think the team, as much as they've put into it, as much as they've fought, it's fitting that Ohio State and Nebraska kick things off. I mean, they've wanted to play the worst, and it would have been real easy to just say, hey, man, we're a couple years away. Let's just use this to get better and not embarrass ourselves. Nebraska's not going that route. But how do you view 2020?
I don't know if I know yet. I kind of want to see some of those Big Ten games, and that's not a cop-out answer. I mean, when I think about it, big picture, I think you're going to have to get pretty detailed, because no matter if it's Nebraska or some other team, like I don't think this is remotely close to happening, but say, we talked all in the lead up to this, like, well, the Big Ten has to come back by this date because they got to give Ohio State a shot at the playoff. Like, what if through a bizarre, once in a lifetime type of off season, it's more than just a bump in the road for Ohio State, or they get unlucky with injuries or anything, and they go, say, 5-3. Something like that. It's just because it has already been and will continue to be so outside the norm that, depending on your point of view, I think it's kind of easy to explain or explain away, depending on what you want to do. this season as a whole. So if Nebraska has a rough one, it's like, well, if everything had been normal, probably would have seen the progress. So for that reason, I kind of approach this thinking you're going to have to look pretty detailed. Like, is Nebraska's run game improved from where it was a year ago? That's really kind of one of the undercurrents, the constant keys for me in determining where this program's at in trying to get back to where it wants to go. You could look at things like penalties. Are those things down? Would you really have if penalties as a whole were up across college football, I don't think that would surprise anybody given what everybody's dealing with. So if you do something like that, maybe that's a little bit more telling. And I almost think those things for me, by the time we get to the end of the year, will carry a little more weight than whatever the records may be.
Hey, Brandon, are you going to apply to be the chief infection officer at Nebraska?
He's the chief barbecue officer.
Dude, that's literally, though, a title that each team is going to have to appoint, is a chief infection officer. It's like the worst title. Could you picture a worse title on a resume? I'm just like,
it's a bad name tag.
It's not good. Just want to go into this testing a little bit. Because there's a couple things that work. So from a team perspective, this is how it works. If you have greater than 5% positivity as a team, positive tests divided by total number of tests administered, more than 5% there. And then if your population positivity rate, meaning how many people are in the program and divided by number of individuals that are positive, if you kind of meet that threshold, which is 7.5%, the other threshold, which is 5%, the team suspends activities for 7 days. The individual who tests positive is out for 21 days. All that said, I'm curious, Brandon, if you've seen this testing, the antigen testing that's in place, super sensitive, right? It detects a level of virus that is pre-infection that maybe other testing methods would not pick up. So presumably it's more, it's just more sensitive like that, and presumably you pick up more positives. But do you know, Brent, is it infection positivity rate or just presence of the virus positivity rate? Because I think that is those are semantics that really matter as to whether or not the team's going to be able to, be able to practice and play.
Yeah, and there's a couple of those in this for me, and I don't know the answers yet. So I think when I read through the medical documents from the conference, so if you test positive for the presence of the virus with this antigen testing, then you go to the old style test and get tested there. And if that's a positive, then you're basically out for 21 days, right? The individual player, I mean, and this is all based on 7-day rolling averages. So it's never like, well, we had 15% today. So, I mean, it may stop practice that day for sure. But, there's still some chance to make up the ground. The other thing I'm really interested in is is this specifically outlined? So for that team percentage, does the Big Ten have a standard there of, okay, everyone, so for that population, the team population is players, coaches, graduate assistants, trainers. I mean, is it everybody at practice? Because then you're getting up to 215, 220 people probably at a place like Nebraska. Maybe not quite that high, but you're certainly approaching 200. Because if it's not outlined that way, then, hey, Tuesday might be the day to test those student managers finally, depending on where your numbers are at. And I'm not saying teams aren't going to do this in good faith, because I absolutely think they will. There are serious, health and safety concerns here. So it's not recruiting. It's not where you're like, oh, everybody's just going to manipulate it. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if it's not outlined and we don't know that it is yet, it's hard to know exactly. The test at first glance seems pretty stringent, but there's just a couple other questions I need answered before we fully know what it's going to look like.
You hear stories back in the day when it came to steroid testing around the world of college football. You had a couple of guys that could take the P test for you. Let's just fast forward this thing to a 2.0 version where you got your COVID testers, right, Brandon?
Need a couple of clean bodies who get the nicest dorm rooms on campus, whatever they need. Don't go anywhere.
You can only talk to them, no eye contact, and it's FaceTime only. Right? I mean, they're just in their bubble. What's your thoughts on the opt-in and waiver situation? Listen, I'm all for Ohio State's two studs coming back. I'd like to see Bateman with Minnesota. If James Franklin can re-recruit Micah Parsons, more power to him. And then I would love to see Rondale versus Wandale. I think that'd be really cool. How do you think that proceeds? Do you think the NCAA can move quickly and get something turned around so these kids who had no hope of playing their final year of college ball can at least come back and be with their teammates?
I would think so. It would be a really tough look to, tell Micah Parsons, be like, hey, sorry, we thought you thought your season was done and you weren't going to get one more year, but that was a choice you made. You can't come back. I'm assuming all of these will go through. And yeah, when we talked, I think on Thursday, talking about Rashad Bateman and what a huge loss that was for Minnesota. Well, now it looks like, pending that waiver, he'll be back. And that's good. It isn't all about, you want to see the college football that we thought we were going to see, or at least as close to it as we can get. And the more good players that are able to opt back in, the closer we come with that. So I hope all those guys, and I think they will, if they want to play, they'll be given the opportunity to play. And that's the right thing to do.
Brandon, is there a silver lining here, do you think, with sort of like, yes, you missed out on a lot of spring practice, but you're getting kind of this extended fall camp. Yes, there's been interruptions, but it just in terms of like volume of reps, volume of practices dating back to early August. Is there a silver lining here that could help a team like Nebraska who's trying to break in players like Omar Manning, Xavier Betts, the inexperienced receiver position? Do you think it's going to sort of like shorten their acclimation period because they're getting so many reps?
I think it could. I think the bigger thing, and I talked about that a little bit on the Varsity Club podcast with our staff this week. Think back to that initial Scott Frost press conference where he was talking about how encouraged he was with how the team, he saw them kind of bonding and forming through this. And, we didn't get to see the fruits of that. Maybe we still will. If that shows up on the field, I think that's a very good development. But in addition to kind of this weird kind of practice schedule where we know Nebraska had a bunch of guys stay in Lincoln, even through the spring, when there was kind of every chance and reason to go home, they had a good portion stick around. I think this has the opportunity to be kind of a touch point or a coming together for this group that hasn't totally shown up on the field through those first 2 years. Everyone was optimistic in 2018, but cautiously so. And you come in and you go 4-8 again. So, I mean, we all remember there were some encouraging things in that season. It wasn't like they didn't make progress. I'm not saying that. It's just the proof was hard. And then last year, things were really optimistic, and you won one more game. So again, you kind of have that like, well, when's it going to click for us? And I don't know if the amount of time Nebraska was able to spend together as a team through all of these bizarre circumstances are that touch point either. But I think it has an opportunity for that to be in a way that a team like Penn State, and who knows, maybe they're saying the exact same thing, but that's a team that with the way they were set up, with the talent they had at the points they were at in their careers, they benefit from just regular season in a vacuum. If everything's normal, Penn State's going to be pretty good. Nebraska, we didn't have that with the Huskers yet. So I think there is a chance that it boosts them a little bit in a way that isn't true for all teams.
Brandon Vogel's with us, managing editor, HailVarsity.com and magazine weekend edition of Hail Varsity Radio. Follow Brandon on Twitter at Brandon L. Vogel. From a mindset standpoint, what's the rallying cry for this Nebraska team? Is it our voice helped get football back? Is it let's help get Coach Frost into year 3 after, a really tough beginning to this football year with the postponement. And then, of course, from a personal side, the loss of his father. Let's go help take care of Frost. Or do you look at it as, and I saw this with Colin Miller's Twitter, where the old us against the world kind of veered its head up just because of all the arrows Nebraska's taken nationally. And that's something that I don't know if players care about at this point, but just the national narrative, right? I mean, if you get Ohio State and Nebraska to kick things off, if it doesn't go well, I mean, it's going to be, let's get in line and pile on Nebraska. About you could revisit just how vocal and renegade Nebraska was in some national circles. How do you think the team will rally? Or is it just as simple as, hey, we fought to get football back, we're getting a chance, and they're going to play free because of that?
Yeah, I think Nebraska can kind of go into this year with some sort of feeling of, hey, we're already 1-0. In terms of just their willingness to fight and the role that they played in getting a football season at all, I mean, I kind of look at that decision as, if you don't have the public pressure, but you have the rapid testing, it doesn't happen. I don't know if the Big Ten willingly on its own goes back and says, hey, there's been some developments here, and we're going to look at this again. If you have the public pressure but don't have the rapid testing, I don't know if it happens either. So it was those two things, but Nebraska was certainly one of the most vocal and out front, and they can I think they can use that as a little bit of a boost right from the start of saying, hey, we were out there. Our coach was out there fighting for us. Now we've got to kind of make good on this. And I think you used the right word. It allows you to play a little bit free. Now it's like, okay, now we can just focus on the football. Should also offer some incentive to be pretty vigilant in terms of all of the things they're being asked to do with the safety protocols. I mean, could you imagine if Nebraska, God forbid, ends up as one of these teams that can't play a game? Based on what we saw from, not just the national media, but just outside fan bases. It's one of those kind of made for college football Twitter things if that should happen. So there's ample motivation here for Nebraska, I think, on multiple fronts.
All right, Brandon, you're the chief sellout officer. Not sell out as though like, hey, man, you sold out. Sell out as in like selling out a stadium. How do you handle this year officially as you tout the consecutive sellouts?
I think you basically just put it on pause. Or you do the one golden ticket and you sell one ticket, official attendance 1. And if you want to boost the numbers, you could go that route. No, I think we've seen this question a couple of times in the mailbag as it looked like a completely full stadium, and if you don't have any tickets to sell, really, and it sounds like based on what the Big Ten has released thus far, parents will be allowed in. I guess technically you have to put those up for sale, but I think you just put pause on the streak. Everyone understands why. It's unique circumstances, and everyone can probably assume that had there not been restrictions in place, Nebraska's streak probably would have continued. So I say let's just pick it back up in 2021.
Do you think, by the way, that Nebraska will do something akin to, what the Dodgers and several major league teams have been doing, where you have like the cardboard cutouts of the fake fans? Do you expect Nebraska to do something to include fans that's maybe outside the norm?
Yeah, Bill Moose referenced trying to do something, but didn't get specific. I'd be surprised with the cardboard cutouts, but maybe. I mean, the timeline is just so short to actually getting back on the field that I'm guessing it'll be tough to do that, particularly with reduced staffing at the moment, which hopefully will start being alleviated soon. But short staffing in the athletics department, we know that they do a great job. Are more than capable of being creative here, like we saw with the virtual spring game. So I'm sure there'll be some things to try and get some people involved in a way that gives you something. You can't be in the stadium, but here's something. Cardboard cutouts. I mean, we haven't seen it a ton in college football yet, so I'm guessing they'll probably forgo that.
I've got to go here. Will we see a Joe Burrow cardboard cutout in the end zone against Nebraska in Columbus Week 1?
That would be pretty good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just, I mean, have a cardboard cutout of him when he was like 5 years old riding his bike around Memorial Stadium. Just go there.
You could have a whole consternation corner of like all the human beings that have rattled Nebraska. You got Major Applewhite in there. You got Chase Daniel.
Wow.
Go ahead, throw in Burrow, throw in Gabbert.
Well, Nebraska needs to bring their own cardboard cutout for the visiting section and have Stanley Baptiste and Levante David and Rex Burkhead, cutouts with them. Bring them with the last time they beat Ohio State. And then Ohio State will just counter with a big old giant replay on loop of the Lightborn kickoff. So,
yeah, or the photo of Memorial Stadium in that was a 2017 game at halftime.
Or just the look in the eyes coming out of the tunnel of 2017. Let's go back in the gate. Vogues, what are you working on this weekend, bud?
Well, we'll be watching a Big Noon Saturday. I'm sure they're going to release about one game every 10 minutes. I doubt they're going to show up and say, we know everybody wants to get back to game day, so here's Big Ten schedules. Did some legwork, pre-legwork on that last night once the announcement came down. So analyzed those schedules a little bit for today. Just had some baseball go up on the website, courtesy of Mike Babcock, and preps coverage from last night from our team. So it'll be a pretty full weekend.
I got to see Greg Smith and Derek Peterson last night at the Southeast Prep game. What a fourth quarter that was, man! What a game, and awesome write-up. Some really talented kids from Southeast. Awesome program, and of course Prep and Rollins, fantastic there. So, yeah, read that. Vogues, you're awesome, man. It was fun to chat. Great to have football back, and we'll do this again soon, bud.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. It's Brandon Vogel, HailVarsity.com and magazine managing editor. Get his book, Dream Like a Champion with John Cook. And it's time for the Iron Horse. Gary Sharp coming up next on Hail Varsity Weekend. We're presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Early to rise with Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Here's Chris Schmidt and Mark Kranek.
Back with your weekend edition. It's Hail Varsity Radio presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Kranek, Damon Barr. The Iron Horse is in. It's Gary Sharp. Sharpie feels a little bit different today. We had hope last Saturday. We still have hope today, but a little more certainty in an uncertain world. How are you this morning?
Good. How does it feel to be 5 weeks from opening day?
Dude, I have been waiting for you to give me the update for a long time, man. And you would, for years it's 8,000 days till kickoff. I mean, you would be there for us and say, hey, just 12 days till kickoff, 5 weeks from kickoff. We got quite the morning war going on between Game Day and Fox. And my question is somebody from the Big Ten office confiscated Ronnie Green's Twitter handle or Teddy Carter's phone? I mean, can Nebraska one up the Big Ten here one more time this week here before Big Noon?
Well, that would be great, like in the next 10 minutes if Nebraska sends out their schedule. But let's don't even try and avoid it anymore. The Big Ten and Nebraska are at war. I mean, when Ted Carter says, hey, later tonight there's going to be something coming down, and the Big Ten says, no, we'll wait until Wednesday morning, but yet on a recorded statement, one of the spokespeople for the Big Ten says, welcome to blah, 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 Tuesday night. Mm-hmm. Then you have Ronnie Green yesterday say early next week, and the next thing you know, late last night, here we go. The schedule's going to be released on Fox. At least we get one. When we were talking last week, guys, I said the Big Ten has to do something. They have to have some type of plan whenever they're starting. They got quickly to a plan. I'm encouraged. The messaging was so much better this time rolling out than, of course, back in August. If you want to go back, you can and break down what happened in those 5+ weeks. But now the conference has to move forward. I think, you know what, they went from being the laughingstock of college athletics in what they did and the way they presented it to, I think they get some kudos for their return to play because it's the most stringent protocols for health that anybody has at the collegiate level. And that's put on the Big Ten because now they put the onus on the players, the staff, everyone involved, that if you want to play, you have to do the right thing because if you trip up, you're going to be out for 21 days, and your team could be out as well. And I think because of the rapid daily testing, you'll be able to prevent some outbreaks. I still think we're going to have a hiccup or here. I don't know that everybody will get to play 9 games in 9 weeks, but it's game on. I mean, you have no let-up. When you get the schedule today, you're going to find out you have no buys. You go 8 weeks and 8 games, and you try and find a way of an opponent on that championship week. So I like the Big Ten a lot better this week. I still think they got some issues, but we got something.
Gary Sharp is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. As you look at the testing protocols, you're right. One thing I'm trying to figure out, Gary, I don't know if you've figured it out yet. Brandon Vogel hadn't either. But because this testing is so much more, I guess, accurate, right? It detects a level of virus that other testing does not detect. It's like it detects pre-infection level of virus in your body. So somebody walking around, no infection, no symptoms, but presence of the virus, no matter how small. So that's promising overall medically. Like, that's good. But do you know if that counts towards the percentage thresholds that dictate whether or not a player can play or a team can practice? Do you know does it have to be an infection or is it just presence of the virus?
Now, this is what I've garnered, and that's a great question. And we still have some questions about the population. We didn't know if it was the community, was it the campus, was it, just your football program. I believe it is if you have the infection is when that is registered. And if that's the case, you feel a little bit more comfortable. But you're absolutely right about the accuracy of the testing, which is big because look at what we've had in the last 24 hours. We've had Florida Atlantic and Georgia Southern have to step aside, but I think even more where the Big Ten can avoid this is Baylor and Houston, where Baylor has multiple players that are in contact tracing. You should be able to avoid that with the Big Ten. But I think those kind of questions, Mark and Schmitty and Damon, those are still out there that I think the Big Ten will need to address so that everybody's on the same page. There's still a lot of red tape to go through, and I think coaches are excited. There were schools practicing yesterday, but they still have questions on how this works and how this will be applied and what their role in all of this is.
Gary Sharp is with us, the Iron Horse, Hail Varsity Weekend. If the announcement is what we think it may be, and that is Nebraska at Ohio State Week 1, your reaction is what?
Well, I think Nebraska is going to play Ohio State on the road. They're going to play Penn State at home. They'll drop the Rutgers game. This is the pre-COVID-19 schedule. Nobody should be whining. Nebraska needs to find out where they're at. And if you're playing Ohio State, it's the two teams that they should put together a trophy game for. Maybe it's those hands from Happy Gilmore, Chubb's hands, that are just reaching across and the hands are together because they kind of bonded with each other. Nebraska made some noise, and Ohio State beat the drum. And those two programs kept fighting through, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. And we got to where we are midweek and to where we are this morning where we're going to get a schedule. I'll be interested to see how the Big Ten rolls out a schedule because I don't think you can start the season in October 23rd and 24th and have bad games. I think you got to come out with a bang. But I'm also very curious to see, like, for example, Ohio State, Michigan, where that's placed on the schedule. If Nebraska gets their wish and they're in Iowa City on Black Friday. Lots of questions, but whatever the schedule is, we'll take it, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that 5 weeks from now, whether on a Friday or a Saturday, Nebraska's playing football. But whatever that Ohio State-Nebraska game is, man, there's going to be a lot of unifying going on both sidelines because Ohio State and Nebraska from here on out are brothers in arms.
Do you think on the field, though, Nebraska's ready for that smoke? Ready to play Ohio State? So this is the fun part of all of our jobs, guys. We get to now start talking about X's and O's again and about the football stuff. We assume, I think there's going to be some teams that are really going to be slow out of the gate because they either haven't been together
They have had to take some time off. I think the teams that really have not missed a beat since June 1 are going to be ready to go. I think we think Nebraska's in that category that this could be what they went through, maybe a +1 on the side of a win. I think it actually might benefit the program more in 21. But Nebraska still has the same issues they had before they shut it down. They still have the same questions. I think you kind of want to avoid Ohio State at all costs because Ohio State will be on a mission. Ohio State has to at least go 8-1, ideally go 9-0, and they probably need to steamroll about 7 of those opponents to have the College Football Playoff Committee look at them and go, oh, yeah, they're one of the best 4. But you know what? You got to find out where you're at. It's okay to find out where you're at. And if it's Ohio State in the opener, well, here we go. It's the 2 teams that haven't missed a beat, so that might be one of the more entertaining and more competitive games you hope to kick off the season.
And if you do open up with Ohio State and they hand it to you, but it's just that they're that good, it's not really about you, it's more about them. Sharpie, I think it could be building, and I'm not moral victory guy, but hey, you came out of the gate after a lot of rust on a lot of different weeks because of this stupid virus. You can only go up, right? So, and that's who you're chasing. Everyone's chasing in the league. Hey, it could benefit you the rest of the years. Where I'm looking at it.
Well, and it's on the schedule. I mean, look at Nebraska's schedule next year. And let's just be honest, from here on out, the Big Ten is not going to do Nebraska any favors with the schedule. Actually, I expect here in about 15, 20 minutes when the schedule comes out, Nebraska will open at Ohio State, and then they will get to go to Clemson, South Carolina. They'll go to Tuscaloosa. I believe they will stop in Athens, and then they will come back and play in Columbus, and then they will give them a home game, and maybe like 5 to 10 fans will be allowed. Right. But Nebraska's got a difficult schedule this year. They got a difficult schedule next year. You have to play. You have to find out where you are. If you're a competitor, you want to go out and play the best. And, of course, Ohio State is the best. But let's find out about Nebraska. This is a year to find out these questions that we've had about Nebraska. Let's get them answered. Because I think this year is one of those years where we still have questions, but we feel like it's heading in the right direction, that 21 sets up really well. So I'm just glad they're going to play football this year. They're going to find a way to do it safely. And you know what? The added caveat of this is everybody gets a free season, and it's not a free season where you linger into 21. It's a free season in 20, and then you can turn around and play in 21, which I think will be a huge benefit to a program like Nebraska.
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit further because that's kind of tough to wrap your brain around still. So everybody that plays this year, it's like they didn't play. It's like there's no eligibility, like ramifications to playing this year, right? That's how it's looked at. So like a senior like Ben Stille, he gets basically 2 senior years. What will that do as we look forward? 1, to like roster management, and then 2, just to sort of depth in general. And what does a ruling like this, like which types of teams does this favor?
I think this favors teams that don't have an abundance of seniors. Nebraska doesn't have an abundance of seniors. But what will happen is guys like Ben Stille, Dedrick Mills, Brendan Hymas, guys that we think are going to move on, especially Mills and Hymas, they finally get some film. So more than likely they will move on. And as a coach, you don't have to make those tough decisions about scholarship numbers and who you get to stay, and because you promised somebody else or you have people coming up. But it's an opportunity, I also think, for younger players to play. Everybody's going to need a lot of depth here. And I'm not just talking walk-ons. You're going to need all 85 scholarship people to contribute. So you can play freshmen, and you don't have to worry about a limitation on their games. You can experiment with freshmen if need be. But if the teams that are much older, I think it'll affect them the most. I think teams that are younger, that don't have an abundance of upperclassmen like Nebraska, I think it'll benefit because you'll make that transition and you'll get the younger guys a lot more work, so you'll continue to develop depth. But I'm also happy for guys that are in this league that are like the Mills or the Hymases, or the Boodles that have an idea of playing at the next level. They're 3rd, 4th, 5th round guys. They're going to get some film for the NFL scouts so they can improve their stock, where it didn't look like that was going to happen, a couple of weeks ago.
Gary Sharp's with us, Hail Varsity Radio Weekend. Sharpie, I want to go to the fans' question and topic. And while the Big Ten stepped in and said, we don't care what your local authorities and health officials have to say, no fans for anybody, Do you think let me put it this way, hypothetically, if we could pool our money and afford a skybox, do you think we'd be able to maybe sneak our way in, or do you think it's going to be pretty tight when it comes to who can actually be in there? I mean, it's open to family, right?
Well, that's what the plan is. I actually think, guys, after the first couple of games, that they may revisit this. I think it's more than Nebraska that is asking about fans and selling single-game tickets, that we might get a couple of weeks in, and the Big Ten looks across the board and says, okay, if it's okay in your local community and you have a plan, we'll allow you to have fans. I think originally when they rolled this out, they didn't want to get into that debate. They wanted to be fair across the board. Either some will have fans or nobody will have fans or everybody will have fans. I think they'll be, I actually think they'll be awful tight on this, that they will follow those protocols because everybody has to be buttoned up through this. It is not easy to navigate what the Big Ten has put in front of you. They have said, okay, you want to play football, you got to do this, this, and this. And schools are looking at it and they're going, all right, it's a business. We're spending a lot of money. Rapid daily testing, guys, is very expensive. We're spending a lot of money to make some money, so we're not going to mess this up. But I wouldn't be surprised maybe if we get to week 4 that possibly there could be in your local communities fans. But by that time, it might be awful cold in some of these Big Ten locales.
Okay, I got in a year full of, if this, then what kind of questions. How about this one, Gary? Just curious here, putting you on the spot. If coronavirus takes over the quarterback room and literally all 5 quarterbacks on the roster are not able to play, who's playing quarterback? Who would you pick from the current team?
Don't ask
to
that.
Step in.
I would go Cam Taylor-Britt.
Nice work.
Okay. And elaborate. I know why, but for our listeners who may not.
He played quarterback in high school in Alabama and was pretty good. But when Nebraska recruited him, they said, we see you more as a defensive back. And I think I've heard stories that he's kind of messed around, like during the spring at quarterback. He would be the guy that I would put in there. But you bring up an interesting point. I think we're going to see as we get closer to the return for the Big Ten, they're going to follow the lines of the Big 12 and the ACC and the SEC, that there is a minimum number of scholarship players that you have to have available. The SEC is going to vote this week on 53, which you have to have at least a minimum of 1 quarterback, I believe 7 offensive linemen, one of them has to be a center, and then 4 defensive linemen, so that you can play. I think you'll see that in the Big Ten. But it would not be a bad idea to take a guy like Logan Smothers and maybe have him hang out somewhere else. Not be in that quarterback room every day, just in case something happens. Maybe Logan Smothers is out at Beechner Field working out with, walk-on wide receivers so that you can keep him healthy just in case. Look at Josh McCown is a COVID quarterback, and he's hanging out at his house. It's not a bad idea, and I wonder how many other programs are thinking about it. But there'll be a minimum of scholarship players at each position that I think the Big Ten will adhere to. That is, if you're missing 30-plus scholarship guys, you got a big problem on your hands. And in this case, the Big Ten would shut you down for a week, and you wouldn't be playing anyhow.
Sharpie, we'll get you out of here on this, man, and it's great to talk football. Just a thought from you on Larry Frost. I know you've covered high school sports for a large part of your career, and just sad news this week for the Frost family, and condolences to Scott, his brother, and mother. But did you have much interaction with Larry in your career, or just a thought or two as we say goodbye?
I did a couple of times. I was able to interact with Coach. He was coach, and Scott and Steve's mom, Carol, was coach before we ever knew about Scott and Steve. Very, very generous man, loved the game of football. He loved being a husband. He loved even more being a father to those 2 boys. I know there was great pride in seeing his sons become successful in the sport that he loved and was so successful at in his time at Nebraska, and then starting with Malcolm, and then the time that he has spent. Loved young people. Loved the energy of the game of football. He was just a very quiet man. when you'd hear him speak, and he was very generous with his time. And I think it shows, what a wild range of emotion, guys, for Scott Frost on Wednesday. And his father had been battling cancer for a while and had not been in the greatest of shape. So you're trying to get back to the field, and you have these players that are fighting to get back on the field, and you're supporting them, and you're trying to keep everybody together. And somebody who is really framed you as a football mind and as a person, your father, is toward the end of his days, and you have to fight those emotions. And I think Scott kept it pretty much in check, and you guys know he's pretty private about his family. But I'm glad that publicly people are talking about Larry Frost, because all the stories that you're hearing from ex-teammates at Nebraska, from Coach Osborne, from other people that knew Larry, they're absolutely true. And we will always have the moment, and I happened to be there a couple of years ago at the High School Hall of Fame banquet in Lincoln. Scott and his father went in at the same time, and it was a pretty cool moment that we'll all cherish and remember, and I hope more people share stories about Larry Frost.
Sharpie, thanks for the thought, man. We'll get back at it next week, and have a good week, buddy. Thanks for the time.
Hey, thanks, guys, as always.
Take care. That is the Iron Horse, Gary Sharp.
You think about how sort of innovative Larry Frost was. I mean, you just think about the decision, especially at the time that he did it, of how atypical it would be to hire your wife as an assistant football coach. Right? Like, what? Who does that? Like, that doesn't happen. And you just think of it doesn't happen now, let alone 30 some years ago when he first started doing it. And you just think about how Scott has grown up in such a unique way because of like how his parents are. His mom's a world-class Olympian and was a football coach.
And was a hell of a wide receivers coach. He is a hell of a wide receivers coach.
Right. It's like such a unique upbringing. That's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible. And it gives you a little bit of insight, I think, into sort of how Scott rolls. Like the example that he saw growing up is just like you the whole concept of diversity or whatever is just burned into him. Yeah. It's not even like a thought, right? You're just sort of like, that's just, like whoever can do the job is I don't care if it's a woman, I don't care. Yeah. Black, white, right? Like it's really interesting how he's grown up, and Larry left a legacy. Who's a hell of a player too.
Yeah, incredible.
Let's not forget that. There's a reason why he went into the Hall of Fame.
Well, Cranack, we'll be back at it. We'll have a full schedule to chat about next week, and have a good week yourself, brother.
You as well.
All right, that's Mark Cranack, Chris Schmidt. Big thanks to Damon Barr. You want to get a hold of this show. It was pretty fun to actually talk about the future and where things are at. We can check that out, HailVarsity.com or iTunes for the podcast. We'll be ready to go at 4 on Monday with Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Have a good one.